Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 5 of Opening Basics. Today we're continuing our look at the Sicilian with a couple of variations in the Sveshnikov and the Kalashnikov that are slightly off the main line, but still quite solid ways to play for black and with interesting dynamic possibilities. So let's take a look at it. The openings start out e4, c5, knight f3, and now the main line continues with d6, and all the lines in the Sicilian we looked at so far were following on d6. The Najdorf, the Sicilian, the Dragon, and the Scheveningen all start with d6. Now the move that introduces the Sveshnikov and Kalashnikov variations is knight c6. You can still at some point transpose back into those other variations, so I'll make note where that can happen, but usually this move is played as a way of introducing the Sveshnikov or the Kalashnikov. So white here has a choice of moves, and the move bishop to b5 is interesting. I'm going to talk about that in a later move. That's known as the Rossolimo variation, and there's also knight c3 just developing, but the main line is to play d4 as in the other Sicilians, just going for an open Sicilian, and c takes d4, knight takes d4, and this is the position where the Kalashnikov could be played with e5, but it makes more sense to talk about the Sveshnikov first, and then because the Kalashnikov often transposes into the Sveshnikov, so we should cover that one first. Before we get to the Sveshnikov in this position, there are other options for black in addition to e5 or knight f6, which would be the Sveshnikov. He can play e6 here and transpose into a Taimanov Sicilian, or he can play g6 here and have an accelerated dragon. And those are lines in the Sicilian we'll cover in later videos. But knight f6 is the main line of the Sveshnikov. And it's similar to the main line we were looking at previously. The idea is just to attack the e-pawn. It can't go forward because this square is guarded. In this case, it's guarded by the knight. In the other cases, it was guarded by the pawn on d6. But in either case, this e5 square is guarded. So white needs to defend the pawn, and if the pawn is defended with the bishop, which is sometimes played in the other line, of course, you lose the knight. Remember the queen, you have to remember your knight on d4 is under attack, and your queen is the piece that defends it. So the usual move here is knight c3, defending the pawn. And now if this is one of those points where black can transpose. If he just plays d6 here, then we've got the classical Sicilian, which we talked about last week. Instead of d6, he could also play e6, get into a variation of the Taimanov, and or g6, get into a type of dragon formation. So those are ways to play, but the Sveshnikov is the funny-looking move, e5. And that's this move e5 is what the Sveshnikov and the Kalashnikov have in common. Now, Sveshnikov was a Russian chess player, and I think in the 50s he used to show his opening. This was his idea. I don't think he was the first player to play it, but he was one who really persisted and tried to prove that this was a working opening. Anyway, the story goes that the other players, Botvinnik in particular, would just laugh when they saw this opening and say, is this any way to play chess? It does look a bit funny, you know. White is black. Black is leaving this d-pawn behind, just forging on ahead with his e-pawn. But his e-pawn is supported here. It's defended by the knight, and it gains a tempo, and it gains a square in the center. So it has some things going for it. Now, white tries to punish this in a way by continuing to develop his knight forward and threatening to play knight to d6. And now if a6 is played, for example, this is not a good move because knight d6, bishop takes, queen takes, and this just turns out to be an annoying position for black. The queen is it can be dislodged here, but this pawn weakness is going to remain, and white has the advantage of the bishop pair, and a little more space. And so eventually white should go on. And well, white has a significant advantage here. I can't say it's a winning advantage, but in general, black avoids that. And so what he plays in this position to keep the knight from coming out to d6 is he just plays pawn to d6. And so now this pawn is defended. It's defended by the queen and the bishop, so the knight can't take it. And it's white's turn to come up with a move. And there is a threat here, so white actually has to be on his toes already. And the threat is a little bit distant, but it goes like this. It's a6, kicking the knight back, and the knight only has a square a3 to go to. And then after a6, black plays b5, threatening b4, which would fork the knights. And then, so that provokes another reaction from white, maybe moving one of the knights away. And then the pawn goes to b5. So that's a6, b4, b5, all happen with tempo because they all come with threats. And now b5 is threatening this knight, which is defending the e-pawn. So indirectly, there's already in this position a threat on the e-pawn. Let's erase all these other arrows. And it's not so obvious the first time you wander into this position, but this pawn is under pressure from black's knight, and the only piece defending it is white's knight. So white has to do something about this. I suppose it's playable to play a move like bishop to d3. Let's see. Does the chess engine, just out of curiosity? Yeah, it gives the advantage to black after that move, so it's not a great move, but it doesn't lose material at least. But anyway, a better way to play this is to pin the knight. Get one of your undeveloped pieces to an active position, so that's the main move. And now black follows through with his plan. He plays a6, kicking the knight back, and b5, threatening this immediate fork of the two knights. And but now, since white has taken the trouble to pin this knight, he has the move knight to d5, and this knight is secure on this square. It can't be taken by the pinned knight. And this pawn is also secure. There's also another way to play it. There's two moves in this position for white. One of them is knight d5, and the other is bishop takes f6. So bishop takes f6 is an interesting move. So let's take a look at that first. What's funny is that white and black here does not take back with the queen because he doesn't want to allow the knight to come to d5 with tempo. And it's not like it's a losing move, but it's a fair advantage for white to get his knight on a good square with tempo against the queen. So instead, black takes with the pawn. And now knight d5 is played anyway. White has to deal with this threat of b5 all the time, threatening to fork those knights, so he needs to get his piece here. And then black puts his doubled pawn to use immediately by playing the move f5 and starting to undermine white's center. So play might go like this. There are different lines here, but say f5 and bishop to d3. It's important to defend the pawn, and you don't want to leave the knight here too weak. So defending with the bishop, if the pawn is exchanged, the bishop come here is helping to defend the knight along with the queen. So you have to take care of this advanced knight if you're white. It's important to notice that the move f3 is actually losing. So you're thinking if you want to support that knight, isn't it best to support it with a pawn? But just tactically, this doesn't work. Black can grab that pawn, and then the famous queen check coming over here, hitting the king and threatening the undefended e-pawn. And of course, if you block with g3, then queen takes pawn, checks the king, and picks up the rook in the corner. So white is just losing there. So the normal move in this position is to defend the pawn with the bishop. It's possible to take here, but black has a pretty good position after bishop takes. So this is quite comfortable for black. So anyway, let's back up and show the normal move here is bishop d3. So this is where I'm going to leave off this variation. It's an interesting position, roughly balanced. Black has the bishop pair, so that's a material advantage, but he does have doubled pawns. His goal is going to be to try and undouble those pawns. White has a little more space, a little easier development in the sense he can just castle here And these pawns on the queen side that have been advanced, they may become weak and come under attack. So white will probably have to move the c-pawn at some point to give this knight a route back into the game, maybe c3 or c4, and it's possible these pawns can come under fire and become weak. So black, his main problem is his king, is maybe not going to find a good home very easily, but he has the open lines and he has the two bishops, and he has aggressive intentions against the center, so there's a lot of active possibilities for black in this position. So interesting game should ensue from this point. Let's back up to this decision point here. So white has a choice of taking immediately on f6, leading to the position we saw where black has a lot of active counterplay, or he can play knight d5, hoping to try and quiet down the position a bit, not give so much activity to black. Now normally black will, there's a threat here on the knight, so normally black defends with bishop e7, and the typical way to take, which you might not expect upon first looking at it, is white normally takes with the bishop. The thing is, this bishop, it's a good piece, and of course white is giving up the bishop pair, but this knight is just a tremendous piece, so it's better to keep this knight on d5 and give up the bishop. And in this position, black usually takes back with the bishop. No reason to mess up the pawns here. And black is not, white is not going to grab the bishop because, first of all, it doesn't do any damage to black structure. The queen comes out, and that's really an excellent position for black. So no, what white is going to do is he's going to sit here with his knight in the center of the board and try and prove that this is making black's further development difficult. So white's next move here is either c3 or c4. I think c3 is the old main move, but c4 has been played more recently. But the main idea is to give a square for this knight to get back into the game. And after c4, that kind of forces some action b4, and the knight goes to c2. That's one way to go. Or with c3, more common line, black can just castle, and knight c2. And so this line you see is a little bit safer for both sides. There's not those open lines and the wrecked kingside structure you got in the previous line. But white has some real positional trumps in this position. He has the idea of bringing his knight here, or perhaps here, to help defend and maintain a knight on the d5 square. He also has the idea of undermining the pawns with the push a4 and with the bishop looking out on the queenside pawns. Black once again has the bishop pair, so black has a material edge, and he's got a safer king position in this case, but he doesn't have as many open lines, so his goal is going to be to try and open things up and get the bishops active. And so once again, an interesting game can ensue from this point, and that's what I wanted to say about the Sveshnikov. Let's back up to earlier and talk about the Kalashnikov. Here, I'll go back to the beginning and let's go over the opening step by step. So it's e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, introducing the idea of the Kalashnikov or the Sveshnikov. And now white, going along with this, plays d4. So there's the exchange, get into the open Sicilian. And now at this point, as I mentioned before, there are other choices like e6 and g6 and knight f6 leading to the Sveshnikov like we saw. But the Kalashnikov is this move e5 immediately. And so I just wanted to tell a story about Kalashnikov. I don't know, there is no Russian chess player named Kalashnikov. The only Russian Kalashnikov is the man who founded the arms empire, and there's of course there's a machine gun named the Kalashnikov. So I believe that this, the first recorded instance of the name Kalashnikov was in a book where I forget the author, maybe Pandolfini or one of those New York authors was talking about this opening, and he said it was jokingly referred to by the local players as the Kalashnikov, this immediate e5. So I guess the idea is it's an aggressive way for black to play, reminding them of a Russian machine gun. And perhaps taking into account the similarity with the Sveshnikov. So it appears to be just a typical example of American humor that somehow has become quite the common way to refer to this opening. Anyway, once again, the knight's under attack, and it goes to b5. Now, one difference here is that actually the move a6 is not so bad in this position, and it's playable. White would still want to move his knight to d6 and basically get the bishop pair. Black doesn't want to move his king in that position, so he's got to take the knight. So what's different in this position is that the knight has not been played to f6, so black can try and neutralize white's pressure here by playing, queen to e7 or queen to f6. And if there's an exchange, he can take back with the knight, develop his piece. And this is actually quite a playable position for for black. Although with the queens off, it's maybe not such an exciting way to play, but it is a playable position, something to keep in mind. But the main line is still d6, just eliminating that possibility and trying to keep all the pieces on the board for a little while. And at this point, white can transpose back into the Sveshnikov. So it's white's choice, and if he plays knight to c3, just developing another knight, then we'll get into a Sveshnikov by one way or another. So, for example, a6, knight here, knight f6, and this is a position from the Sveshnikov where this is the place where white plays bishop g5. There's another way to play this, which is knight f6 immediately, and then bishop g5 is the normal move here, and then a6 and here, and once again we're in that after b5 we're in a Sveshnikov once again. So those are ways to just transpose back into the Sveshnikov, so we've already looked at those. But white has another choice here. After d6, white can play the move c4, and this wasn't possible previously because in the Sveshnikov, black played the knight out to f6, attacking the e-pawn, and white's knight had already gone to c3, defending it. So those moves have not been played. This pawn is not under attack, and so white is free at this point to put in the move c4, and this will clamp down on the move b5 from black. So the game takes on a different character at this point. Normally black continues to develop, bishop to e7, and now white develops the knight. And we do get this a6 move, so this is typical, and knight comes back here. But now there's no point really in playing b5 at this point. So black will continue developing with a move like bishop to e6, or sometimes f5 is played there. And the game continues from here. I'm going to leave the Kalashnikov at this point. It's once again a playable opening and interesting for both sides. There's all the pieces are still on the board, so there's a certain amount of maneuvering that goes on. White is going to bring his knight around to get it back in the game. Black is going to counterattack the center and develop his pieces and castle to the king side. And yeah, white needs to develop this bishop and castle as well. White does have kind of a clamp on the center, and he's going to try and maintain that and avoid exchanges and try and keep all the pieces on, because this clamp on the center gives him a slight space advantage. And in the long run, he may have pressure on the d6 pawn here, which is backwards, although it takes a long time for that to take effect. Many games have been played in this, and that's a very distant dream to take advantage of the pressure on the backwards d-pawn. So a playable position once again for both sides, and leading to interesting play. So that concludes this episode of Opening Basics. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will be back soon with more Opening Basics. Bye.